Hello everyone. Today we'll be learning about how to take inputs from a text file and how to write the contents to another text file as output using Python. So without further ado, let's get started. So there are different types of ways you can actually read a file. So I'll be covering some of the methods and so that you could be familiar with all of them and use it according to your needs. So first of all, let's see. Okay, initially let's start with open. So initially let us see something first. I have created a Python project and I have created two input files in the same directory. One is input.txt, another one is input1.txt. I'll be coming to those in a bit. So I'll be solving some of the difficulties that you might face regarding this. So I've created two different input files. We'll get to this in a minute. So why I have kept these two input files in the same place as where I have created my project is that if you were to create or keep the txt files in a different location, then you'd have to put down the absolute path, and that would lead to a bit of a hassle. So I have just kept the two input files in the same directory as my project is. So uh, it solves or reduces some of the hassle. You do not have to put down the entire absolute path. So let's get started. So using with open, you can do the function of reading and reading the files. So let's get started. First of all, what we did is that we have put down the name of the input file, input1.txt, and given the permission read, which is represented by R, and we have referred to this input1.txt as fdata1. You can give any variable name as you see fit, and simultaneously what we have done is that we have also written an output1.txt file, because you need to write your outputs to a file, right? So in order to do that, we have also created an output1.txt file and given the permission write, and which is represented by W. So, and we have also referred to this file as file5. You can give any variable name as you want. So once these two lines are done, so now you will read the actual contents of the file, right? So remember, we have already referred to the input1.txt file as fdata1. So in order to read this file, so you just simply call the read method on the fdata1. So what we do is that fdata1.read, and we have kept it in another variable named fdata2. So what fdata2 initially holds is that all the contents of input1.txt. For instance, we have hello guys, World Cup, it's coming Rome, right? So all these contents are now in fdata2, but we would also want to have these lines separated as well, right? For instance, if we only want to access World Cup, so how would we do that if we have all the contents in just one variable, right? So in order to come up with a solution, what we do is that we use the split method, and as a separator we are using a new line. So what this essentially does is that it takes each of the lines and keeps it on a list in a different position. So the data is a list, and all the different lines over here are kept in different positions of here. For instance, if we print the data1, that is basically the second line, so if we hit run, so what two things will happen. First of all, we'll see that the output1.txt file has been created in the directory that we kept our project in, and then we'll also see that the data1, which is the second line, is also printed in the console over here. So if we hit run, we'll see that over here you can see that World Cup, which corresponds to the second line, has been printed, and if we go back over here, we see that now the output1.txt file has appeared. And if we take a look into output1.txt, it does not contain anything, as it should, right? Because we have not written anything to the file, right? So now let's go back and write something. So writing to a file is very easy. So you just simply write the file 5 with the name that we've given for the file, and we simply use write and then the thing that we want to write. So basically, let's say we want to write these two lines, that is the hello guys and the World Cup. So what we do is that we refer to the first position. The first position contains the hello guys, yes, and the second line corresponds to World Cup. So what we do is that we write these two lines, and also we will be adding a new line. Remember, you have to add a new line manually, because otherwise it will just print the statements on the same line. So in order to do that, we simply write /n, and we got the previous content, that is the previous line, and the next line. So if we hit the run button, what we will see in the output file is that we'll have these two lines. If you look correctly over here, here's the hello guys and the World Cup as well. So this is a simple method of reading from a file and writing to another file using Python. Now I'll talk about the other method as well. So before moving on to the next part, I just wanted to mention the few benefits of using with open. So oftentimes the other methods that we use to open files, we have to close the files down, or otherwise that would lead to some errors or problems. So when we are using with open, we do not need to keep in mind to close the file. So that eliminates the risk of getting errors. And also another point is that when we are using with open, error handling becomes much easier, so it's better suited, and people more often use this instead of the other methods. So let's move on to the next part. Okay, so let's do it in a different procedure. So first of all, let's uncomment all these lines I've written previously, so that would fasten the process. Okay, so remember we had a different input file, right? The second input, if you remember correctly, we had two different input files. So let's say we have the inputs, the first digit is an integer and the second one is a floating point number, right? Okay, so previously we have seen that we can extract line-wise information, right? But what if we had to extract a single number? For instance, there are two numbers over here, right? So if we only had to extract this value or this value, so then what are the necessary steps that we have to follow? And we cannot just simply go on manually just taking all of these inputs, extract all these values, right? So we'd be using a loop to get this work done. So let's see how that happens. So initially we open the input.txt file and give the permission read, so that we can read the file. So in order to read the file, we follow the same procedure. We write file.read, and all the contents are basically now stored in fdata, right? So we have all these contents now in fdata, and we have to write it to another txt file as well, right? So we create that file, so we give that name as file3, and we open the file as output.txt, and we give the permission write, like the previous cases as well. So now initially, first of all, we separated the data line wise. So we used a new line as the separator, and we separated all these data. And now these are all kept in different positions in the data list. So if we print data 1, we would see that we would get the first line values, that is 1 and 2.6, and we'd see that previously there was no output.txt file. We would see that an output.txt file would appear over here. So let's see when we hit. Okay, so there are a lot of things, other things printed. Let's just omit this for the time being. Okay. So as you can see, oh, I didn't comment out the previous code, so that's why the second output came. So let's comment those out. Okay, so now let's run it up, and as we see, oh, we have chosen the second line. So the second line would be printed over here. As you can see, it's 3 and 4.8, and our input file's second line contain 3 and 4.8 as well. So it's working correctly, but now we have to extract each of these values, right? So how do you do that? So initially the data contain 3 lines, right? So we have to run the loop till the length of the data, right? So we just simply write this down for I in range of length data, and then what we do is that according to the different lines, we split the data based on separation of the white space, right? So each of these two datas has been separated by a white space. So in order to get those different values like in a list, so in order to get these two values in a list, what we do is that we separate using a white space. So that's the thing that we do. And in this loop we have used data followed by I, so that for each of the different lines we're going to get two separate values which are separated by a white space. So f1 essentially contains, for the first case, it contains 1 and 2.6, right? So now this value, we have to take it as an integer, right? So we have to convert it. So in order to convert this value, so we take the initial position, that is f1 0, which corresponds to this value over here, and we have to take it as an integer, right? So we just cast it by int, and this value has been saved into a new variable called I1. And now we want to write this value in our output file, right? So what we do is that we cannot just simply write down I1 directly into the file, because in order to write to a file, you have to write it as a string, right? So you cannot just simply put down I1 because it has been converted into an integer value. So what we do is we again cast it back to a string using str. So now our file will contain this value. So our output file will contain the ones. Now let's try to keep the output file as the same as the input file. So what we have done over here is given an empty space. So now our output file should technically contain only this part, right? 1 followed by the empty space. And now for the floating point number, what we have to do is that initially, remember, we have stored the 1 and 2.6 in f1 in the different positions of the list of f1. So initially we had worked with the first position, now we have to work with the second position, right? So what we have done is that we have simply casted the value that we're getting from the second position, that is the 2.6, and we have casted it to a floating point value, and this has been stored to a different variable named fl1. And similarly, we're going to write this to our output text file as well, right? So what we have done is that we have again converted this floating point value to a string because otherwise, remember, it won't work on the output file. So we have converted it back to a string and then written it to the file. And since for each line, after each line you have to give a space, a new line, right? So otherwise all of the outputs would have been on the same line followed by these values. So we do not want to do that. So what we do is that we write an empty line, and after all these have been done, we have to close the file. Remember, in the other case we did not have to close the file because that following that procedure removes the hassle of closing files. But if you follow this procedure, you have to close the file, otherwise you'd run into some errors. So if we hit run, what we'll see in the output file, see the output.txt has appeared, and we'd see that all the values are here as in the same format as in the input.txt. So if I zoom in a bit, that will be clear. So this was the initial input.txt, and in the output.txt we have got the same values in the same format as well. And there are other methods like readlines. You can just Google them and get a glimpse of how those works. So that is basically the file input output, how you take inputs from a text file in Python and write it to a text file using Python. So that would be all from this tutorial. See you later.